Hey everyone, welcome back to Lilly's Language Mastery Podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today. If you're brand new to this show, welcome to your new favorite place for transforming how you speak and communicate. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, and if you really want to stay connected, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear this message. Trust me, you'll be doing them the biggest favor. Don't forget to check out our complete language mastery playlist, where you'll find hundreds of episodes just like this one, packed with practical strategies, real-world exercises, and everything you need to become fluent faster than you ever thought possible. Seriously, go add that playlist to your library right now, because you're going to want to binge through all of our content. Today's episode is going to absolutely change the way you think about language learning. We're diving deep into a topic that most people completely overlook, but it's genuinely the most powerful secret to achieving real fluency that lasts. Stick around until the very end, because I'm going to share something extraordinary that most language coaches never tell their students about. Let's jump right into it. I've been working with language learners for over 15 years now, and I've noticed something really fascinating. Most people who struggle with fluency aren't actually struggling because they don't know enough vocabulary or grammar rules. They're struggling because nobody ever taught them the actual foundation that makes real fluency possible. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this podcast episode. Let me start by asking you something really honest. Have you ever studied a language intensely for months, maybe even years, and then when you finally tried to speak with a native speaker, your mind just completely froze? You couldn't remember anything. Your tongue felt heavy, the words wouldn't come out, your heart was racing? Does that sound familiar to you? I'm willing to bet it does, because I hear this story from students constantly. The reason this happens isn't because you're not smart enough or because you don't have a good memory. It happens because there's a massive gap between knowing something intellectually and being able to use it automatically in real conversations. Think about how you learned to drive a car. You didn't become a good driver by reading about driving. You became a good driver by actually driving over and over again until it became automatic. Language fluency works exactly the same way. Here's the thing that changed my entire approach to language teaching. I realized that true fluency isn't something you learn. It's something you build slowly and consistently through daily practice. It's like building a house. You don't build a house all at once. You lay one brick at a time, day after day, until eventually you have a solid structure that can withstand any weather. Your language skills are exactly the same. The foundation we're talking about today is what I call your daily practice architecture. And I promise you, if you implement even half of what I'm about to share with you, you will see measurable improvements in your speaking abilities within just 2 weeks. Not months, not years, but 2 weeks. That's because you're going to be building those automatic neural pathways that create genuine fluency. Let me break down how the brain actually works when it comes to language learning. Your brain has something called procedural memory. This is the part of your brain that remembers how to do things automatically without thinking about them. It's why you can ride a bike without consciously thinking about balance, or why you can tie your shoes without looking at your hands. When it comes to language, procedural memory is what creates fluency. Most language learners focus exclusively on their declarative memory, which is your conscious memory of facts and rules. You memorize vocabulary lists, you study grammar patterns, you read explanations about how to use certain structures. All of that goes into your declarative memory. But when you try to speak, you need to access your procedural memory, not your declarative memory, and that's why you get stuck. The only way to build procedural memory is through repetition and practice, lots of it. But here's the catch. It's not just any kind of repetition. It has to be the right kind of repetition, done in the right way at the right time. And that's what we're going to explore in this episode. I'm going to give you a complete system that will help you build those procedural pathways so that when you open your mouth to speak, the words just flow naturally. The first principle you need to understand is something I call micro-exposure. This is the idea that instead of trying to do one big, intense study session, you do many small sessions throughout your day. Your brain actually learns better with frequent, shorter exposures than with one long, exhausting session. It's scientifically proven. When you space out your learning over many small moments, your brain consolidates the information more effectively. Think about how social media companies have figured out how to keep you addicted to their apps. They give you small little hits of dopamine throughout the day. You check your phone, you see a notification, you get a little reward. That's the same principle we're going to use for language learning, except instead of checking notifications, you're going to be practicing English or whatever language you're learning in small, focused bursts throughout your day. The magic happens when you take advantage of all those tiny moments that normally go to waste. You're waiting in line at the grocery store. You're on the bus commute to work. You're sitting in a waiting room at the doctor's office. You're making your breakfast in the morning. All of these moments are opportunities for micro-exposure to your target language. And when you add up all these small moments, they become significant chunks of practice time without you even really feeling like you're studying. Here's a real example from one of my students. Sarah used to spend 5 minutes on her phone checking social media every morning while she drank her coffee. She decided to use those 5 minutes to listen to a podcast in her target language instead. She did that every single morning for 2 months. At the end of those 2 months, she told me that her listening comprehension had improved so dramatically that she could understand about 70% of native conversation without subtitles. 2 months, just by using 5 minutes that she was already spending, but using it more intentionally. That's what I want you to understand. You don't need to find more time in your day. You already have enough time. You just need to use the time you're already spending more strategically. The time is already there. You're just going to redirect it toward your language learning instead of toward mindless scrolling or other activities that don't serve your goals. The time is already there. You're just going to redirect it toward your language learning instead of toward mindless scrolling or other activities that don't serve your goals. If you can master these 3 areas, your fluency will skyrocket. Let me explain what each one means and how you can implement them in your daily life. The first pillar is input. This means getting massive amounts of exposure to your target language in a way that actually makes sense to you. Input includes listening to podcasts, watching videos, reading articles, listening to music, watching movies and shows. The key is that the input needs to be comprehensible. That means you should understand most of it, probably about 70 to 80%. If it's too easy, you're not learning anything new. If it's too hard, you get frustrated and give up. You want to be right in that sweet spot. Here's what most language learners get wrong about input. They think they need to understand every single word to make the input valuable. So they use a dictionary to look up every word they don't know. They rewind videos constantly. They obsess over understanding every detail. This actually slows down your learning and makes it feel like work instead of enjoyment. Instead, you should let most words pass by without looking them up. Your brain is actually learning them in context, even if you don't consciously realize it. The second pillar is integration. This means taking what you've learned through input and actually using it in real conversations or scenarios. This could be speaking with a language partner, having conversations with yourself, practicing role plays, writing journal entries. Integration is where you start to move from knowing something to being able to use it automatically. It's the bridge between passive learning and active fluency. The third pillar is output. This means actually producing the language yourself through speaking and writing. Output is terrifying for most language learners because it requires vulnerability. You have to risk making mistakes. You have to put yourself out there. But here's the thing, without output, you can never truly become fluent. You can listen to 1,000,000 podcasts, but if you never actually try to speak, your speaking ability will never improve. Output is non-negotiable. The beauty of this three-pillar system is that they reinforce each other. When you listen to input and hear new phrases, your brain starts to internalize them. When you integrate those phrases into conversations or scenarios, you start to understand them on a deeper level. When you output them by using them in your own speech, you cement them into your long-term memory. It's a beautiful cycle. Let me tell you about something I call your morning activation protocol. This is the single most important routine you can establish for your language learning journey. The reason mornings are so powerful is because your brain is fresh, you haven't filled your working memory with 1,000 other tasks, and you have the most mental clarity and focus. If you can establish a strong morning routine, everything else becomes easier. Here's what I want you to do every single morning before you do anything else. Before you check your phone, before you have coffee, before you shower, I want you to spend 10 minutes on this morning activation protocol. And I know you're probably thinking, Lily, I'm already so busy. Where am I going to find 10 minutes? But here's the thing. These 10 minutes are going to make everything else in your day more productive and focused. It's an investment that pays enormous dividends. The morning activation protocol has 3 components. The first component is what I call intention setting. You're going to spend 2 minutes literally speaking aloud in your target language about your intention for the day. You're going to say things like, "Today I will speak my language with confidence. Today I will learn something new. Today I will notice opportunities to practice. Today I am building fluency step by step." When you speak this out loud, you're not just setting an intention in your mind. You're literally activating the speech centers in your brain. You're warming up your voice. You're getting your brain in the right mode for language learning. The second component is what I call word activation. You're going to spend 3 minutes reviewing new vocabulary that you want to integrate into your speech. But here's the key. You're not going to review it the way most language learners do. You're not going to flip through flashcards mindlessly. Instead, you're going to read each word aloud, and then you're going to immediately create a sentence with that word. You're going to say that sentence out loud. This forces your brain to actively engage with the vocabulary in a way that is actually useful. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're learning the word perseverance. Don't just say the word, say it in a sentence. Perseverance is the key to success in language learning. Now say it again with emotion. Perseverance is the key to success in language learning. Notice how I emphasized different words? That's teaching your brain about stress patterns and intonation, which is crucial for natural-sounding speech. The third component of the morning activation protocol is what I call phrase rehearsal. You're going to spend 5 minutes practicing actual phrases that you want to be able to use in conversation. These aren't isolated words. These are expressions, idioms, complete sentences that native speakers use. And you're going to practice them with different intonations. You're going to practice them fast. You're going to practice them slow. You're going to practice them with confidence. You're going to practice them with uncertainty. Here's an example set of phrases you could practice. I would love to hear more about that. Practice it once naturally. I would love to hear more about that. Oh, I'm interested in that. Then, I completely understand what you mean. Practice it once with agreement. Do you see how this is different from traditional language learning? You're not just learning the phrase, you're learning how to use it in different emotional and conversational contexts. I want to tell you about one of my students named Marco. Marco was an intermediate Spanish learner, but he said he always felt stiff and formal when he spoke. He sounded like he was reading from a script. I introduced him to the morning activation protocol, and within 2 weeks, he told me that his speech had become so much more natural. People were commenting that he sounded more native-like. What changed? He wasn't learning more vocabulary or more grammar. He was simply practicing phrases in more natural, varied, emotional ways. The beauty of doing this every single morning is that it becomes automatic. After a week, you won't even need to think about it. You'll just wake up and do it without any conscious effort. It becomes as automatic as brushing your teeth. And then by the time you leave your house, your brain is primed for language learning. You've already activated your language centers. You're already thinking in your target language. Everything you encounter throughout the day will have more impact because your brain is in the right mode. Here's something I want you to understand about neural pathways. Every time you practice something, you're strengthening the neural pathway associated with that practice. It's like wearing a path through the forest. The first time you walk through the forest, it's hard. There are branches and obstacles. But every time you walk the same path, it gets a little clearer. Eventually, it becomes a smooth, easy trail. That's how your brain works with language. Every time you practice a phrase, that neural pathway gets stronger, and it becomes easier to access that phrase when you need it in a real conversation. The morning activation protocol is your way of strengthening multiple neural pathways simultaneously. You're strengthening your pronunciation pathways. You're strengthening your vocabulary pathways. You're strengthening your emotional expression pathways. By doing this consistently every morning, you're building a robust, flexible language ability that goes far beyond just knowing facts about the language. Now, let's talk about what happens after your morning activation. You need a strategy for what I call strategic listening integration. This is how you're going to use all those small moments throughout your day that I mentioned earlier. But you need to be strategic about it. Not all listening is created equal. Here's what most language learners do wrong. They listen to content that's either way too easy or way too hard. If it's too easy, they're not learning anything new. They're just confirming what they already know. If it's too hard, they get frustrated because they can't understand it, so they give up. Both extremes are problematic. You want to be in what I call the optimal challenge zone. This is content that challenges you but doesn't overwhelm you. The best way to find content in your optimal challenge zone is to use a simple formula. Take content that's about 70 to 80% comprehensible to you. That means if you listen to a 10-minute podcast, you should be able to understand about 7 to 8 minutes of it without too much difficulty. The remaining 2 to 3 minutes might have new vocabulary or complex grammar structures that you don't quite understand, but you can figure out the general meaning from context. Let me give you a concrete example of how to implement strategic listening. Let's say you're commuting to work in the morning. That's probably about 20 to 30 minutes, right? During that time, you could listen to a podcast in your target language, but not just any podcast. You want to choose a podcast that's specifically designed for learners at your level, or you want to choose a podcast about a topic that's genuinely interesting to you. If it's interesting to you, you'll actually pay attention. If it's boring, your mind will wander. I have a student named Lisa who loves cooking, so instead of listening to a generic language learning podcast, she decided to listen to cooking podcasts in her target language. Every day on her commute, she listens to people talking about food, recipes, techniques, and kitchen tips. She's not trying to learn language. She's just enjoying content she loves, and she happens to be learning her target language in the process. That's the magic formula. When you learn about something you're genuinely interested in, learning the language becomes secondary. It becomes enjoyable rather than like work. Here's another strategy I call intentional repetition. When you find content that you really love, don't just listen to it once. Listen to it multiple times. The first time you listen, just enjoy it and try to understand the general meaning. The second time you listen, try to catch specific words and phrases. The third time you listen, try to anticipate what's coming next. You're building multiple layers of understanding with each listening. This might sound like a lot of repetition, but it's actually how your brain learns. When you listen to the same content multiple times, different parts of your brain activate each time. The first listen is about general comprehension. The second listen is about detail and specific language elements. The third listen is about prediction and fluency. By the time you've listened to something 3 or 4 times, you've internalized it at a much deeper level than if you just listened once. I want to share a story about a student named Ahmed. Ahmed was trying to improve his English listening comprehension, but he was getting bored with generic English learning materials. So I suggested he choose a topic he was passionate about. He was obsessed with basketball, so I told him to watch basketball videos, YouTube channels, and listen to basketball podcasts, all in English. He started watching NBA games with English commentary. He listened to basketball analysis podcasts. He watched YouTube videos from basketball channels. Within 3 months, his listening comprehension improved so dramatically that his English friends were amazed. And he didn't feel like he was studying at all. He was just enjoying basketball. Now, I want to introduce you to something I call passive-active listening. Most people think listening is either passive or active, but there's actually a middle ground that's incredibly powerful. Passive listening is when you have content playing in the background while you're doing other things. You're not actively focusing on it. Active listening is when you're completely focused on the content, trying to understand every detail. Passive active listening is when you have content playing while you do other things, but you're partially focused on it. You're kind of half listening. The reason passive active listening is so powerful is because your brain can internalize patterns and phrases even when you're not consciously trying. It's like how you learn songs. You don't deliberately study songs. You hear them in the background enough times, and eventually you know them. But if you also occasionally focus on the lyrics, you learn them even faster. The same principle applies to language learning. Here's a practical strategy for passive-active listening. Put on a podcast in your target language while you're doing household tasks. You're folding laundry, you're cooking, you're cleaning your room, you're taking a shower. You don't need to sit down and focus completely, just have it playing. But occasionally, every few minutes, pull your attention back to the content and try to catch what's being said. This does 2 things. First, it trains your ear to recognize your target language even in less than ideal listening conditions. Second, it allows your brain to naturally pick up patterns and phrases without the pressure of having to understand everything. Let me introduce you to one of my absolute favorite techniques for building fluency. It's called self-narration, and it's genuinely life-changing. The idea is simple. Throughout your day, you narrate what you're doing, thinking, or seeing, all in your target language. You're describing your reality in real time, and it's one of the most powerful ways to build fluency because you're connecting your language to your actual life. Here's why self-narration is so powerful. When you describe something you're actually experiencing, you're automatically in a context where you understand what you're saying. You're not trying to understand some abstract grammar rule. You're talking about your own life, which you already know about. This removes the cognitive load of trying to understand the content. You can focus entirely on producing the language, and that's exactly what builds fluency. The simplest way to get started with self-narration is to do what I call the breakfast narration. Every morning while you're making or eating breakfast, narrate everything you're doing in your target language, not in your head, out loud. I am opening the refrigerator. The refrigerator is cold. I see eggs, milk, and cheese. I take out 2 eggs. They are brown. I close the refrigerator door. I walk to the stove. I turn on the heat. The stove is getting hot. I put a pan on the stove. I add butter to the pan. The butter is melting. It smells good. I crack the eggs into a bowl. The eggs are yellow. The whites are clear. I know, this might feel silly at first. You're going to feel self-conscious talking to yourself. But this is literally one of the most effective techniques for building fluency. When you narrate your own actions, you're teaching your brain to think in your target language. You're forcing yourself to generate language in real time based on your actual experience. Let me tell you about a student named Dimitri. Dimitri was learning English, and he was stuck at an intermediate level. He could understand a lot, but when he tried to speak, he would freeze. He'd have long pauses while he tried to think of the right words. I introduced him to self-narration, and I told him to narrate everything he did for 2 weeks out loud every single day. He told me it felt ridiculous at first, but by the end of 2 weeks, something magical happened. His ability to produce speech became so much more fluent. He wasn't freezing anymore. Words were flowing out naturally. He still made mistakes, but he was speaking with genuine fluency. The reason this works is that you're practicing spontaneous speech generation. In a normal conversation, you can prepare what you're going to say. You have a few seconds to think about what you want to communicate. But self-narration forces you to generate speech in real time without preparation. You can't think too hard about what to say. You just have to say it. And that's what builds real fluency. Here's another variation I call journey narration. When you're walking, commuting, driving, or traveling anywhere, narrate what you see and experience. I am walking down the street. There are many cars. I see a red car. It just turned left. Now I see a bus. The bus is yellow and blue. I see a coffee shop. People are entering and leaving. I can smell the coffee from here. It smells delicious. Now I am crossing the street. The light is green. I look both ways. No cars are coming. I continue walking. I see a park. There are many trees. I hear birds singing. The sky is blue. It is a beautiful day. The key to making self-narration effective is to be descriptive. Don't just say, "I'm walking." Say, "I'm walking slowly down the sidewalk and I can feel the sun on my face." The more detail you add, the more engaging the narration becomes, and the more language you're generating. Another powerful variation is what I call emotional narration. You don't just describe what you're seeing or doing, you also describe your emotions and thoughts. I'm making breakfast, and I'm feeling happy because it's Saturday. I love Saturday mornings because I can sleep in. I don't have to rush. I'm taking my time making this eggs and toast. I'm thinking about my friend Sarah. She's arriving at my house in an hour. I'm excited to see her. We haven't seen each other in 3 weeks. I miss her. I'm making extra breakfast because I want to share it with her. I'm feeling generous. She always brings me gifts when she visits. She's such a good friend. Do you see how this is so much more than just learning language? You're actually engaging your emotions and your real thoughts. You're practicing expressing yourself in authentic ways. This is how you build genuine fluency, not just grammatically correct speech. Here's what I want you to do starting today. Pick one daily activity. It could be eating breakfast, showering, getting dressed, your commute, whatever. And for the next 2 weeks, I want you to narrate that activity out loud every single day, completely in your target language. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about making mistakes. Just narrate. Do this consistently for 2 weeks, and you will see dramatic improvements in your ability to produce fluent speech. Now let's talk about building actual conversation ability. And I want to start by challenging something that most language teachers teach. They teach you isolated sentences, they teach you grammar rules, they teach you vocabulary, but they rarely teach you conversation architecture, which is the actual structure of how conversations flow. Real conversations aren't just random exchanges of information. They follow patterns. There are certain conversational moves that appear again and again. If you can master these patterns, your conversation ability will skyrocket because you're not trying to generate language from scratch in real time. You already know the structure. You just need to fill in the specific details. Let me give you an example of a basic conversation pattern. Most casual conversations start with a greeting and some small talk about weather or how you're doing. Then the conversation moves into a main topic. Someone asks a question. The other person answers. Then the second person asks a reciprocal question. Then they might share related information. Then they might ask follow-up questions. Eventually, they might make plans to continue the conversation or say goodbye. This is a predictable pattern. If you practice this pattern enough, you can have conversations on autopilot. You don't need to consciously think about what to say next. The pattern guides you. If you practice this pattern enough, you can have conversations on autopilot. You don't need to consciously think about what to say next. The pattern guides you. Here's what I call the 5-exchange conversation framework. This is a structure that works for almost any casual conversation. The first exchange is the greeting and opening. You greet the person and establish initial rapport. The second exchange is the information exchange. One person shares information and the other person asks clarifying questions. The third exchange is the perspective exchange. People share their opinions or reactions. The fourth exchange is the connection exchange. People find common ground or shared interests. The fifth exchange is the continuation exchange. People make plans or express interest in talking again. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Let's imagine you're meeting someone at a coffee shop who you haven't seen in a while. Hey, it's so good to see you. How have you been? It's been what, like 2 months? I know, way too long. I've been busy with work. How about you? What's new with you? Exchange 2. Information exchange. Work has been crazy, but in a good way. I actually got promoted last month. I'm managing a team now. That's amazing. Congratulations. How many people are on your team? Do you enjoy managing? Exchange 3. Perspective exchange. I love it so far. It's different from what I did before. It's more stressful, but also more rewarding. I'm trying to be the kind of manager I always wanted to have, you know? That's such a good approach. I think a lot of people would appreciate that. Exchange 4. Connection exchange. Yeah, I learned a lot from my previous managers about what not to do. But I had one manager who was amazing, and I'm modeling myself after her. Do you manage people too? Response: I don't, but I've been thinking about it. I'm considering applying for a lead position. Exchange 5. Continuation. Exchange: you should totally go for it. Let's grab dinner next month and catch up more about it. I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking. Response: yes, absolutely. Let me check my calendar and I'll text you some dates. Do you see the structure? It flows naturally and it covers multiple topics, but there's an underlying pattern. If you practice this pattern with different topics and different vocabulary, you can handle almost any casual conversation. Here's what I want you to do to practice conversation. Pick a scenario that you want to be able to handle. Maybe it's ordering food at a restaurant. Maybe it's having a casual conversation with a neighbor. Maybe it's asking for directions. Whatever it is, write out the 5 exchanges using that scenario. Write out what you might say and what the other person might say. Then practice it out loud. Practice it until it feels natural. Practice saying your part faster. Practice saying it slower. Practice saying it with different emotions. After you've practiced one scenario, move on to another. If you practice 5 different scenarios a week, you will be able to handle most real-world conversations within a month or 2 because the underlying structure is the same. You're just changing the vocabulary and details. Let me tell you about a student named Yuki. Yuki was absolutely terrified of having conversations in her target language. She had good grammar and vocabulary, but the thought of having a real conversation made her anxious. I taught her the 5 exchange conversation framework, and I had her practice 5 different scenarios. For 2 weeks, she practiced these conversations consistently. Then I pushed her to have a real conversation with someone. She told me it was the easiest conversation she'd ever had in her target language. She wasn't nervous at all. She followed the pattern, she filled in her specific details, and the conversation flowed naturally. I want to introduce you to a concept that changed my entire approach to language learning. It's called micromastery, and the idea is that instead of trying to learn everything about a topic, you focus on becoming really, really good at one small, specific, limited thing. Then you move on to the next small thing. Most people approach language learning by trying to learn general language ability. They think, I want to be fluent in English. But that's so vague. What does fluent even mean? Instead, let me suggest a different approach. What if you focused on becoming really good at one specific area? Like, what if you became an expert at talking about your job or your work? That's one specific area. Or what if you became really good at ordering food, or making small talk, or telling stories about your childhood? The reason micromastery is so powerful is because when you focus on becoming really good at one specific thing, you're not spreading your energy thin. You're concentrating your effort. You're doing lots and lots of repetitions of the same kinds of sentences and phrases, and that builds actual fluency in that specific area. Here's how to implement micromastery. First, choose one specific, limited domain. I want to be able to talk about my favorite hobby is a good micromastery goal. I want to become fluent is not because it's too vague. Write out everything you might possibly say about that domain. If your hobby is photography, write out sentences about cameras, composition, lighting, different types of photography, experiences you've had taking photos, techniques, and so on. Then, memorize those sentences, but not like a robot. Practice saying them out loud with different intonations and emotions. Practice them fast. Practice them slow. Practice them naturally. After a week of practice, you should be able to talk about your hobby for several minutes continuously without pausing to think about what to say. Then you move on to the next micro-mastery goal. Maybe your next goal is to be able to talk about your profession. Again, write out everything you might say about your profession. Practice it consistently until you can talk about it smoothly. After you've mastered maybe 5 or 6 different domains through micromastery, something magical happens. The pattern becomes clear to you. You realize that you can apply the language structures you've learned in one domain to other domains. You're not learning new language anymore. You're just applying what you've already learned in new contexts. This is related to something called chunking. Chunking is when you combine individual words or phrases into larger units that you can recall as a whole. For example, instead of thinking of the words, "Good morning, how are you?" as 3 separate words, you think of them as one chunk. Your brain processes the whole phrase at once rather than word by word. When you first start learning a language, you don't have many chunks. So speaking is slow because you have to process word by word. But as you practice more and more, you build larger chunks. You might have chunks like, I've been meaning to talk to you about, or I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with, or what I really mean is. When you have lots of chunks, speaking becomes faster and more fluent because you're saying whole phrases at once rather than building them word by word. Micro-mastery is the best way to build chunks because you're practicing the same kinds of structures and phrases over and over in one domain. You're building deep, robust chunks in that domain. Let me give you an example of micro-mastery in action. Let's say I decide my first micro-mastery goal is being able to talk about my typical day. Here's what I would write out. I wake up at 7 in the morning. I feel groggy at first. I take a cold shower to wake up. The water is refreshing. I make myself a coffee. I read the news while I drink my coffee. Then I get dressed for work. My commute takes about 30 minutes. I take the train. The train is usually crowded in the morning, but I don't mind because I read on the train. I arrive at my office at 8:30. I check my emails first thing. Then I usually have a team meeting. We discuss what we're working on that day. I have my own desk with a computer and 2 monitors. I work on various projects throughout the day. I take a lunch break at noon. I usually eat lunch at my desk while answering emails. In the afternoon, I have meetings with different people. Sometimes I'm frustrated by too many meetings, but I try to be present and engaged. Around 5 or 6, I pack up and leave. I take the train home. I'm tired after work. I like to relax for a while when I get home. I might watch some television or scroll on my phone. Then I make dinner. I usually cook something simple. After dinner, I might read a book or work on a hobby. I go to bed around 10:30. I try to get enough sleep because I know it helps me perform better at work the next day. Now, if I practice speaking this out loud every single day for a week, by the end of the week, I can talk about my day fluently. I can do it without pausing. I can do it with natural intonation. Someone could ask me, tell me about your typical day, and I could talk for 2 or 3 minutes straight, smoothly, naturally, without struggling for words. This is how you build real fluency, one micro-mastery at a time. Now let's talk about something that most language learners are absolutely afraid of: mistakes. We're taught from a young age that mistakes are bad. Mistakes mean you failed. Mistakes mean you're not good enough. Mistakes mean you should feel embarrassed. But I want to flip this completely on its head. Mistakes are not the enemy of learning. Mistakes are actually the most important part of learning. When you make a mistake and correct it, you learn more deeply than if you got something right. There's actually neuroscience behind this. When you make an error, your brain releases a special chemical that helps cement the correction into your memory. Here's a powerful technique I call deliberate error review. The idea is that you're not just trying to avoid mistakes, you're actually seeking out opportunities to make mistakes, notice them, and correct them. This might sound backwards, but it's incredibly effective. Here's how it works. Every day, I want you to spend 5 minutes writing about something in your target language. It could be about your day, your thoughts, your plans, whatever. But you're not going to spend too much time perfecting it as you write. You're going to write quickly and naturally, letting mistakes happen. Then, the next day, I want you to read what you wrote the day before. You're going to look for mistakes, grammatical errors, spelling errors, awkward phrasing, whatever. When you find a mistake, you're going to correct it. Then you're going to rewrite the whole paragraph without the mistakes. Then you're going to read the corrected paragraph out loud several times. This process does multiple things. First, you get massive input because you're reading your own words multiple times. Second, you get to practice error correction, which teaches you patterns. Third, you get multiple output opportunities because you're writing the corrected version and reading it aloud. Fourth, you get to build on your own writing, which makes it personal and meaningful. I had a student named Jasmine who was working on her Spanish writing. She was so afraid of making mistakes that she would spend ages on every sentence, trying to make it perfect. I told her to do the opposite. I told her to write quickly and not worry about mistakes. Then the next day, we would review what she wrote and correct it. Within a month, her writing had improved dramatically. And more importantly, her confidence had improved because she was no longer paralyzed by fear of mistakes. Here's another technique called correction reps. After you correct a mistake, I want you to immediately use the correct form multiple times. If you wrote, "I go to the store yesterday," but it should be, "I went to the store yesterday," you would say the correct version out loud 5 times. I went to the store yesterday. 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 This repetition of the correct form helps your brain overwrite the incorrect pattern. Your procedural memory gets updated with the correct form. And here's the key that most language learners don't realize. You don't learn by getting things right the first time. You learn through the process of error, awareness, correction, and repetition. So instead of fearing mistakes, you should be embracing them. Mistakes are proof that you're trying. Mistakes are actually moving you forward. Let me tell you about my own language learning journey. I was learning Portuguese and I made this mistake over and over. I would say, "Eu estou aprendendo português," when I meant, "Estou aprendendo português." The first version has an extra "eu" that's unnecessary. A native speaker corrected me multiple times, and each time, instead of feeling embarrassed, I made a note of it. I wrote out sentences with the correct form. I said the correct form out loud multiple times, and eventually, I stopped making that mistake. Let me talk about something that's really important for long-term language learning success, and that's accountability. Most language learners study in isolation. They do their practice, but nobody knows whether they're doing it or not. And without accountability, it's really easy to skip days, to make excuses, to give up. Here's what I want you to do. Find an accountability partner. This could be a friend who's also learning the language. It could be someone online in a language learning community. It could even be a professional language teacher or tutor. The key is that this is someone who will check in with you regularly and ask about your progress. Here's what I recommend. Have a weekly check-in with your accountability partner. Every week, you tell them what you practiced, how much time you spent, what you noticed improved, what was difficult, and they do the same with you. You're sharing your progress with each other. The reason this works is because of something called social proof. When you know that someone else is counting on you, when you know that you have to report back to someone about whether you did your practice, you're way more likely to actually do it. You don't want to tell your accountability partner that you skipped several days. There's a student named Carlos who was learning English, and he was struggling with consistency. He would practice for a few days, then skip a few days, then practice again. It was all inconsistent. I connected him with another student, Marco, who was learning Spanish. There's a student named Carlos who was learning English, and he was struggling with consistency. He would practice for a few days, then skip a few days, then practice again. It was all inconsistent. I connected him with another student, Marco, who was learning Spanish. This completely changed everything for Carlos. He went from being inconsistent to being extremely consistent. He didn't want to have a weak report from Marco, and Marco felt the same way. They pushed each other forward. Within 3 months, both of their language abilities had improved dramatically. Here's another accountability strategy I call the commitment declaration. This is when you publicly declare your language learning goals. You tell your friends, your family, maybe you even post about it on social media. You say, I'm learning Spanish and here's what I'm committing to do this month. This public declaration creates a sense of obligation. You don't want to admit that you didn't follow through on what you publicly said you would do. And here's something really important. You need to celebrate your progress. Don't just focus on what you haven't achieved yet. Celebrate the small wins. You practiced for a full week? That's worth celebrating. You had a conversation and understood 60% of it? That's amazing. Celebrate it. You learned 10 new words? Fantastic. Celebrate it. The more you celebrate small wins, the more motivated you stay for the long journey. Now, let me talk about immersion. A lot of people think immersion means moving to a country where your target language is spoken. That's one type of immersion, but it's not the only type. And honestly, most people can't just move to another country for language learning. So let me tell you about what I call domestic immersion. Domestic immersion is when you create an immersion environment in your own home or in your own life without having to move. You're surrounding yourself with your target language as much as possible. Here are some strategies. First, change all your technology to your target language. Change your phone's language. Change your computer's language. Change your social media language settings. This might feel uncomfortable at first because you're not used to seeing your devices in this language. But that discomfort is actually good. It means you're forcing your brain to adapt. Your brain will quickly learn where everything is in your new language setting. Second, follow accounts on social media in your target language. Follow news accounts. Follow entertainment accounts. Follow accounts about your hobbies. Every time you scroll through social media, you're seeing your target language. You're getting exposed to it constantly throughout the day. Third, watch shows and movies in your target language. Start with movies and shows you've already seen in your native language. That way, you already know what's happening, so you can focus on the language. You understand what's being said, even if you don't know every word. After you've watched a few movies this way, try watching movies you haven't seen before. Fourth, listen to music in your target language. Put together a playlist of music from singers who speak your target language. Listen to it while you're working, exercising, or doing household tasks. You'll be amazed how many song lyrics you internalize without deliberately trying. Fifth, read books in your target language. Start with picture books or children's books if that's appropriate for your level. Move up to young adult books, then to regular novels. Reading exposes you to new vocabulary and grammatical structures in context. I had a student named Sophia who was learning Italian. She committed to a domestic immersion strategy for 2 months. She changed her phone to Italian. She watched Italian movies with subtitles. She listened to Italian music. She read Italian children's books. She followed Italian Instagram accounts. She was surrounding herself with Italian. At the end of 2 months, she was shocked at how much she had improved. Just from changing her environment without any formal study, her Italian had gotten so much better. Here's another powerful strategy I call language bubble times. You pick certain times of the day when you're only going to consume content in your target language. For example, maybe from 7 to 8 in the morning, you only read, listen to, and watch things in your target language. Maybe from lunch to 1 in the afternoon, everything is in your target language. Maybe in the evening after dinner, everything is in your target language. The benefit of having specific language bubble times is that it creates a clear boundary. You know when you're going to be in language mode and when you're not. This makes it easier to commit to because it's not all day, every day. It's just these specific chunks of time. let me talk about some advanced practice strategies for when you've already built a foundation. These strategies are for taking your fluency from intermediate to advanced. First, there's what I call shadow practicing. This is when you listen to a native speaker and try to speak exactly what they're saying at the same time, or just slightly behind them. First, there's what I call shadow practicing. This is when you listen to a native speaker and try to speak exactly what they're saying at the same time, or just slightly behind them. The benefit of shadow practicing is that it teaches your mouth and your tongue how to make the sounds of native speakers. It teaches you the natural rhythm and intonation of the language. It's not about comprehension, it's about imitation. And imitation is powerful because you're literally training your mouth to move the way native speakers move their mouths. Second, there's what I call debate practice. You pick an opinion or a topic that you have thoughts about, and you practice arguing for your position in your target language. I believe that social media has been harmful to society because... Second, there's what I call debate practice. You pick an opinion or a topic that you have thoughts about, and you practice arguing for your position in your target language. I believe that social media has been harmful to society because... Third, there's what I call teaching practice. You pretend to be a teacher, and you teach someone something in your target language. You could teach them about a hobby, a skill, a topic you know about, whatever. Teaching forces you to use explanatory language, to organize your thoughts clearly, to use transitional phrases, to check for understanding. These are all advanced language skills. Fourth, there's what I call comparison practice. You pick two things and compare them in your target language. You could compare two cities, two foods, two people, two time periods in history, whatever. London and Paris are both beautiful cities. However, London is larger and more diverse, while Paris is known for its romantic atmosphere. Both cities have excellent museums, but Paris is more focused on art and culture, while London has a wider variety of museums. Fifth, there's what I call hypothetical practice. You imagine hypothetical scenarios and describe what you would do. If I could go back in time, I would. Or if I won the lottery, I would. Or if I lived in a different country, I would. Hypothetical practice forces you to use conditional language structures, to express imagination, to think creatively. Let me tell you about a student named Ivan who was trying to reach advanced fluency in German. He'd been learning for several years, and he could have basic conversations, but he wanted to be truly fluent. I introduced him to these advanced practice techniques. He started doing shadow practicing with German podcasts about politics and business. He started doing debate practice by recording himself arguing for positions on social issues. He started teaching practice by pretending to explain German history and culture. Within a few months, his German had transformed. He sounded much more natural. He could handle complex conversations. He could express nuance and subtlety. Now let's talk about something that most language learning materials don't address: maintaining your language ability after you've achieved fluency. Here's the harsh truth that nobody wants to talk about. If you stop practicing, you will start to lose your ability. Language learning is not like some other skills where once you learn it, you have it forever. Language is a muscle, and if you don't use it, it atrophies. But here's the good news. Once you've built fluency, maintaining it requires much less effort than building it initially. It's like the difference between running a marathon and going for a light jog once a week. The marathon is much harder than the jog, but the jog is enough to keep your fitness level reasonably good. Here's what I recommend for long-term maintenance. After you've achieved fluency, you want to keep exposing yourself to your target language regularly. This could look like reading one article a week in your target language, watching one show or movie a month, having one conversation every week or two with someone who speaks the language, listening to music or podcasts occasionally. The key is consistency, not intensity. You don't need to practice for 3 hours a day to maintain your fluency. You just need to do a little bit regularly. I recommend what I call the minimum viable practice approach. This is the minimum amount of practice you need to maintain your fluency without atrophying. For most people, this is about 30 minutes to an hour per week. Here's what I tell students about long-term motivation. You're not going to stay motivated just because you want to be fluent. That works in the beginning, but it doesn't sustain you long-term. Long-term motivation comes from having a genuine connection to the language. Maybe you're dating someone who speaks the language. Maybe you have friends you communicate with in that language. Maybe you're working in an environment where the language is used. Maybe you're interested in the culture. Whatever it is, you need to have a reason to care about the language beyond just wanting to be fluent. I had a student named David who became fluent in French. But after he achieved fluency, he stopped practicing because he didn't have a reason to maintain it. Within a year, his French had gotten worse. He could still understand pretty well, but his speaking had gotten rusty. He felt frustrated. So I encouraged him to find a reason to care. He joined a French book club. He started dating someone from France. Suddenly, he had reasons to keep practicing. And now, years later, his French is still strong because he has ongoing reasons to use it. Another important thing is to have longer-term language goals beyond just fluency. What do you want to do with your language ability? Do you want to travel? Do you want to read literature? Do you want to watch movies? Do you want to have deeper conversations? Having specific goals gives you direction and motivation. I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in language learning discussions, and that's emotional resilience. Language learning is emotionally challenging. You're constantly confronted with things you don't know. You're constantly making mistakes. You're constantly being reminded of how much you still have to learn. This can be discouraging. Many people quit language learning not because the language is too hard, but because they can't handle the emotional challenges. They feel frustrated. They feel stupid. They feel like they're not making progress. And eventually, they give up. Here's what I want you to understand. Feeling frustrated, feeling stupid, feeling like you're not making progress fast enough, these are not signs that you should quit. These are normal parts of the process. Every single person who has ever achieved fluency has felt these emotions. It's part of the journey. Here's what I recommend. Develop what I call language learning emotional resilience. This means preparing yourself emotionally for the challenges of language learning. It means having strategies for handling frustration, disappointment, and discouragement. First, reframe failure. In language learning, there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. When you make a mistake, that's not failure. That's feedback from the universe telling you what you need to work on. You have a new data point. You understand your current level better. You know what to practice next. Second, develop self-compassion. Don't beat yourself up when you make mistakes. Be kind to yourself. You're learning something hard. Everyone who learns something hard makes mistakes. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're learning. Third, celebrate all progress, no matter how small. Did you understand one sentence in a podcast that you couldn't have understood a month ago? That's progress. That's worth celebrating. Did you use one new word in a conversation? That's progress. Celebrate it. Fourth, find community. Connect with other language learners. Join online communities. Find local meetup groups. Having people around you who are going through the same struggles makes it feel less lonely. You realize that everyone is struggling with similar things. You can support each other. Let me tell you about a student named Rosa. Rosa was learning English, and she was dealing with a lot of frustration and self-doubt. She would make a mistake, and she would get really angry at herself. She would think, I've been learning English for 3 years. I should be fluent by now. What's wrong with me? I helped her develop emotional resilience. I helped her reframe her mistakes as learning opportunities. I helped her practice self-compassion. I encouraged her to celebrate small wins. I connected her with other Spanish speakers learning English so she had community. After a few months, something interesting happened. Rosa's language ability didn't change dramatically, but her emotional relationship with language learning changed completely. She was no longer frustrated with herself. She was excited about learning. She wasn't comparing herself to others anymore. She was comparing herself to where she was 6 months ago. And from that perspective, she'd made so much progress. Let me tell you what I believe is the single most important factor in language learning success. It's not talent, it's not intelligence, it's not even having good resources. It's consistency. Consistency beats everything else. Let me give you some numbers. If you practice 1 hour a week consistently for a year, that's 52 hours of practice. If you practice 5 hours a week for only 3 months, that's 60 hours of practice. But the first person who practiced consistently will have made more progress than the second person. Why? Because of how your brain consolidates learning. Your brain doesn't learn from massed practice. Massed practice is when you do lots and lots of practice in a short amount of time. Your brain learns better from distributed practice, which is when you spread out your practice over a longer period of time. The repetitions are more effective when they're spread out because your brain has time to consolidate the information between practice sessions. So instead of practicing 3 hours on Saturday and nothing the rest of the week, it's better to practice 30 minutes every day. Your brain will consolidate the learning better. You'll make more progress in the same amount of time. The challenge with consistency is that it's boring. It's not glamorous. If you tell someone you practice 30 minutes today, that doesn't sound impressive. But if you tell someone you binged an 8-hour course, that sounds impressive. But the 30-minute everyday person will be way more fluent than the binges person. Here's what I recommend. Make language practice so easy that you can't say no. Make it smaller than you think you need. If you think you should practice for an hour, make your goal 30 minutes. If you think you should practice for 30 minutes, make your goal 15 minutes. The idea is that the barrier to entry is so low that there's no excuse not to do it. I had a student named Michelle who was a busy mother with 3 kids and a full-time job. She felt like she didn't have time to practice languages. So I told her to commit to just 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes! She could do that while she was waiting for her coffee to brew in the morning. 5 minutes every single day. She did this for a year. 52 weeks times 5 minutes is about 430 minutes, which is about 7 hours. After a year of 5 minutes a day, Michelle's language ability had improved dramatically. She could have basic conversations. She could understand a lot. She started increasing her practice time because now she was motivated. But even if she hadn't, those 7 hours of consistent practice had made a real difference. Let me talk about some advanced strategies for integrating your target language into your professional and personal life. These are strategies that take you beyond just practicing language and actually using it in real contexts. First, there's what I call professional integration. This is when you use your target language in a professional context. Maybe you start reading professional articles in your target language. Maybe you start communicating with people in your target language through email or messaging. Maybe you start attending virtual meetings where your target language is used. Using language professionally forces you to use precise, technical language. It's challenging, but it's incredibly effective for building fluency. Second, there's what I call creative integration. You use your target language to create something. You write stories, you write poems, you write blog posts, you create videos. You make music. When you're creating something, you're forced to generate language rather than just consuming it, and the creative process helps you explore the language in deeper ways. Third, there's what I call teaching integration. You teach your target language to someone else. You could tutor someone, you could teach a class, you could help a friend. Teaching forces you to explain things clearly, to use examples, to check for understanding. These are all advanced language skills. Fourth, there's what I call relationship integration. You develop a relationship with someone where your target language is used. You could have a language exchange partner. You could have an online friend you message with. You could have a pen pal. Having an ongoing relationship in your target language keeps you motivated and gives you authentic reasons to practice. Fifth, there's what I call travel integration. You plan a trip to a place where your target language is spoken and you immerse yourself in it. You navigate using the language. You order food using the language. You ask for directions using the language. Travel is one of the most effective ways to accelerate your language learning because you're forced to use the language in real situations. I had a student named Thomas who was learning Mandarin. He didn't have much time to practice formally, so he came up with a creative integration strategy. He started a YouTube channel where he documented his language learning journey. He created videos talking about his learning process, sharing tips, interviewing other learners. He did this all in Mandarin, even though his Mandarin was not yet perfect. This creative and teaching integration had a massive impact on his Mandarin. Within a year, his Mandarin had become really strong, partly because he was practicing so much, but also because he had a reason to practice. He had an audience. All right, my friends, we've covered so much ground in this podcast episode. We've talked about the foundation of language learning, the morning activation protocol, strategic listening, self-narration, conversation architecture, micromastery, error correction, accountability, immersion, advanced practices, maintenance, emotional resilience, consistency, and integration. That's a comprehensive system for building genuine fluency. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with some final wisdom. Language learning is not a destination. It's not something you do until you're fluent and then stop. It's a journey that you're on. And the more you lean into that journey, the more enjoyable it becomes. Language learning becomes less about achieving a goal and more about enjoying the process of growing as a person. Here's what I want you to remember. You are capable of achieving fluency. You have everything you need inside of you right now. You have a brain that can learn languages. You have the ability to practice. You have access to content. You don't need permission. You don't need special talent. You just need to start. Start today. Not tomorrow, not next Monday, not next month. Today. Pick one of the strategies we talked about and start today. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be a start. Remember that consistency beats intensity. Small, regular practice beats occasional big efforts. And remember that mistakes are not obstacles. Mistakes are the pathway to fluency. Every mistake you make is a step closer to genuine fluency. I'm so excited for your language learning journey. I can't wait to hear about your progress. Stay connected with our community. Share your progress. Celebrate your wins. Support others on their journey. We're all in this together. And hey, make sure you go back and check out our language mastery playlist. There are so many more episodes with strategies, tips, interviews with fluent speakers, case studies of people who have achieved amazing results. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with people you think need to hear these messages, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. This has been Lily's Language Mastery Podcast. I'm Lily, and I'll see you next time. Keep practicing, keep believing in yourself, and keep speaking your language every single day. You've got this. Thanks for listening to Lily's Language Mastery Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and check out the Language Mastery playlist for more content just like this. Until next time, keep building your fluency one day at a time.